My name is Elena Hart. 23 years ago, my parents split up, divided my family like furniture in a divorce, and left me behind. My mother took my little sister, my father took my older brother. And me? I was 8 years old when they dropped me at a children's home with one green suitcase and a promise they never intended to keep. They didn't lose me. They didn't search for me. They didn't fight for me. They simply built 2 new lives and made sure I wasn't part of either one. For 23 years, I heard almost nothing. Then I built something they suddenly couldn't ignore. A bakery. A real one. Not a dream scribbled in some notebook. Not a fantasy I whispered to myself at night when I was a foster kid staring at a cracked ceiling. A real business. My name on the wall, my recipes in the ovens, my hard work in every corner of the place. And the second my family saw that I had become successful, the calls started. My father called first, then my mother. Then my brother, then church people, then distant relatives, then strangers repeating a version of my life so fake, so polished, so insulting, I barely recognized myself in it. In 1 week alone, I got 41 calls. After 23 years of silence, they were suddenly desperate to be family again. So I invited them. I invited all of them to my bakery's grand reopening. I gave them front row seats. I stood behind a microphone in a room full of customers, neighbors, journalists, and the very community they were trying to manipulate. And I told the truth. What they expected was a reunion. What they got was judgment. And before I tell you exactly what happened, take a second to like the video, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Now let me take you back to the summer of 2003, to a kitchen table in rural Georgia, and the exact moment I learned what it feels like to be the child nobody chooses. The kitchen table in our house on Miller Road had a split down the middle that my father had been promising to fix for months. He said he'd do it next weekend, then the weekend after that, then when business got better, then when the weather cooled down. He always had an excuse. That night the crack looked wider than I had ever noticed. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe I just understood things differently after that evening. My brother Ryan sat on my father's side of the table, jiggling one knee under the wood and picking at the corner of a paper placemat. He was 11, old enough to sense tension, but still too young to fully understand the kind of damage adults can do when they call something temporary. My little sister, Chloe, was only 4. She sat in my mother's lap, half asleep, one arm curled around a stuffed rabbit that had lost an eye months earlier. Her hair smelled like baby shampoo. Her shoes were still dusty from the yard. I sat across from them all with a glass of sweet tea warming in my hand. The ceiling fan clicked every third turn, click, click, click. The kitchen smelled like fried onions and engine grease because my father had come in late from the auto parts store and never washed his hands properly. That smell lived in everything he touched. The doorknob, the cabinets, the salt shaker, even the napkins sometimes. My mother spoke first. Your father and I have decided to live apart for a while. Not divorce, not separation, nothing with legal weight. Just, for a while. That's how adults soften disasters for children. They wrap permanent things in temporary language and hope the damage arrives slowly enough to be called manageable. Ryan looked up first. Chloe didn't understand. She just rubbed her eyes and leaned harder into my mother's chest. I remember looking from one face to another, waiting for the rest of it. My mother explained that she would be moving closer to her sister in Perry. She said it like proximity to family was some practical, reasonable thing. She said she would be taking Chloe with her because Chloe was still little and needed her mother. Then my father said he'd stay in the house with Ryan because he needed help around the store after school. Ryan was old enough to be useful. That was the phrase, old enough to be useful. I waited. I remember the fan clicking. I remember the rabbit in Chloe's hand. I remember the crack in the table looking less like damaged wood and more like a borderline, something that had already split us before anybody admitted it. And then I asked the question nobody had answered. What about me? There are moments in life when silence is louder than shouting. That was one of them. My father rubbed the back of his neck. My mother adjusted Chloe on her lap. Neither of them looked at me. Finally, my mother said, "We'll figure something out, sweetheart." That was it. 7 words. No plan, no detail, no comfort, no timeline, not even the decency to pretend they had been thinking about me. We'll figure something out. I was 8 years old, but I understood immediately what that meant. It meant nobody had chosen me. I was the middle child, too old to be adorable, too young to be useful, too ordinary to trigger anybody's guilt in the right direction. Ryan had a role, Chloe had a role, I was the leftover. Later in life, I would hear adults use that same tone for all kinds of cruelty. We're doing what's best. It's complicated. You'll understand when you're older. But back then, all I knew was this. My family was being divided into pieces. and I was the piece nobody wanted to carry. 2 weeks later, a county worker named Mrs. Hensley drove me to St. Agnes Children's Home in a sedan that smelled like peppermint gum and old seat fabric. My father followed behind us in his truck. He carried my suitcase to the steps like luggage. Not like it belonged to his daughter, not like it contained the only life an 8-year-old had, just luggage. The suitcase was green, hard shell, one of those cheap old models with wheels that never rolled straight. It had once belonged to my mother. My father set it down on the concrete. He put a hand on my head, not a hug, not even both hands, just one rough palm on the top of my hair, as if I were a dog he felt sorry for and not a child he was abandoning. "I'll come back for you," he said. Then he turned around, got in his truck, and drove away. I watched the taillights shrink past the magnolia trees at the end of the drive until they disappeared. He did not come back the next day. He did not come back the next month. He did not come back the next year. And the worst part? For a long time, I still believed he would. St. Agnes was a 2-story brick building with chipped white trim, a rusting swing set out front, and a basketball hoop that didn't have a net. The inside smelled like bleach, floor wax, canned vegetables, and old radiators. It wasn't cruel exactly. It was simply the kind of place where comfort had never been the point. The hallways were too long, the lights were too bright, the mattresses crinkled under the sheets because of the plastic covers, the doors shut too loudly, and the children there all looked at you the same way when you were new. Not with curiosity, with measurement. They wanted to know whether you were a crier, a screamer, a biter, a bedwetter, a thief, a talker, a runner, or the worst kind of all, a hopeful one. Hopeful kids suffered the longest. The first girl who spoke to me was named Tessa. She had 2 missing front teeth and a scar above one eyebrow. She pointed to the dining hall and said, "Breakfast is at 7. Don't be late. The eggs get cold fast and nobody saves you anything." Then she rolled over in bed and ignored me. That first night, I didn't cry. People think children always cry when they're abandoned. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes the shock is too clean, too sharp. Sometimes all the crying happens later, in quieter ways. That night, I counted the ceiling tiles. The next day, I counted footsteps in the hallway. By day 7, I stopped checking the parking lot every time a car pulled in. By day 30, I stopped expecting my father to appear. By day 90, I stopped believing anyone would. He called once, about 6 months later. The conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. "You doing okay?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Good," he replied. "Good." Then he said he had a customer waiting and hung up. My mother never called at all. Years later, I found out she had been telling people I was living with a nice foster family in Savannah. A lovely Christian couple, she said. She repeated it so many times she probably convinced herself it was true. That's the thing about liars. If the lie protects their reputation long enough, they start calling it memory. The first adult who actually looked at me, really looked at me, wasn't related to me at all. His name was Amos Bell. He was the cook at St. Agnes. He was broad-shouldered, flour-dusted, loud when he laughed, and permanently irritated by bad ingredients and lazy habits. He had the hands of a man who had worked around heat his whole life, scarred, wide, steady. I found the kitchen by accident, or maybe the kitchen found me. I couldn't sleep one night. One of the girls in my room talked in her sleep, and another one cried so quietly it was worse than if she had been sobbing. The plastic on my mattress crackled every time I moved. The hallway light leaked under the door in a yellow strip that made the whole room feel temporary. So I got up and followed the smell of butter. Amos was in the kitchen rolling cinnamon dough at a steel counter, radio playing low in the corner, sleeves pushed up, apron streaked with flour. He looked up and saw me in the doorway. "You lost?" he asked. "No, sir." "You hungry?" "No, sir." "Then pull up a stool and make yourself useful." That was my introduction. No pity, no head tilt, no fake softness. He didn't ask why I was awake. He didn't ask where my parents were. He didn't give me the look I had already started to hate, the one adults use when they want credit for feeling bad for you. He handed me dough. "Work it till it stops sticking," he said. I did. That night turned into every Tuesday and Thursday, then every morning before breakfast, then any hour I could sneak into the kitchen without being in somebody's way. Amos taught me how to brown butter by smell, not by color. How to tell if bread dough had proofed enough by pressing 2 fingers into the surface and watching how fast it rose back. How to separate eggs with one hand. How to fold biscuit dough without killing the rise. How to trust heat. How to trust timing. How to understand that recipes, unlike people, rewarded consistency. One morning, while flour drifted through a shaft of sunlight over the prep table, he told me something I would carry for the rest of my life. Baking is honest, he said. You can lie to people, you can lie to yourself, but flour won't lie back to you. If you rush it, it shows. If you neglect it, it shows. If you care for it, it rises. Then he added, the dough doesn't care where you came from. I held on to that sentence harder than I held on to anything else. The dough doesn't care where you came from. At 9 years old, when most kids were still being tucked into bed by their mothers, I was learning that ingredients had more integrity than blood. On my 9th birthday, one nobody at St. Agnes knew about except me, Amos slid a small leather notebook across the counter. The cover was worn. The corners were bent. It smelled faintly like vanilla and smoke. Write down every recipe you learn, he said. Someday you'll need them. On the first page, in pencil, pressing so hard I nearly tore the paper, I wrote, Apple pie chef. Amos says start simple. Nobody had ever given me something that assumed I had a future. That notebook became more than paper. It was proof. Proof that someone believed I could become more than the child who got left. The next 10 years were a blur of moves, rules, temporary bedrooms, careful unpacking, and learning not to grow attached too quickly. I went to 3 foster homes. The first house belonged to the Danvers family. There were too many children and not enough room. I slept on a folding couch in the den for almost a year. Mrs. Danvers tried. Mr. Danvers barely noticed who was in the house unless somebody was too loud. Then he'd appear in the doorway and sigh like our existence personally inconvenienced him. The second family lasted 3 months. They wanted a younger child, more moldable, more grateful-looking, less complicated. I was returned like something that hadn't fit properly. The third house lasted 2 years. Longer than the others, but not long enough to matter in the way I wanted. They ran a daycare from their living room. I helped with toddlers after school, warmed nuggets in the microwave, wiped noses, tied shoes, read picture books until my voice went thin. Then Mr. Weller got a transfer to Ohio. One more kitchen table. One more carefully phrased explanation. One more version of, you understand, right? Yes, I understood too well. Every time I moved, I packed the same green suitcase and the same leather notebook. The suitcase got more scratched. The notebook got more full. By 16, I had filled pages with recipes copied from library books, cooking shows, whispered tips from church women, measurements I memorized because I was afraid of losing them, and inventions of my own. I wrote down everything: cornbread ratios, peach compote notes, pie crust adjustments for humid weather, the exact second caramel shifts from amber to bitter, how long to toast pecans before the oils wake up properly. These were the things I could keep. These were the things no one could take by saying, circumstances. A few times over the years, I asked about my parents. Once, I asked a caseworker if they had ever tried to get me back. She checked my file. No. Another time, I asked whether they had formally surrendered their parental rights. She said no to that too. That somehow hurt worse, because it meant they hadn't even bothered to fully let me go on paper. They just let me hang there, unclaimed, unresolved, unwanted in practice, but not officially erased. Like I was a task they kept meaning to finish and never did. I aged out of the system on my 18th birthday with $500, a folder of documents, 1 green suitcase, and the notebook Amos had given me. No graduation party, no family dinner, no, we're proud of you, just paperwork. $500. That was what the state gave me to begin adulthood after a childhood everybody else had spent avoiding responsibility for. I walked out without looking back, because sometimes if you look back, you waste precious time hoping someone will run after you. Nobody did. I ended up in Macon because it was where the bus ticket took me for a price I could afford. That's the truth. People like to imagine survival stories begin with bold plans. They usually don't. Sometimes they begin with whatever destination is cheapest. I rented a room above a laundromat on Cherry Lane. The walls smelled like detergent and damp plaster. The floor hummed when the industrial dryers downstairs were running. The hot water came and went. The paint peeled near the windows. It was beautiful, not because it was nice, because it was mine. I walked into a bakery called Golden Crust on a rainy Wednesday morning and asked if they were hiring. The owner, Mr. Patel, looked at my sneakers, my suitcase, and the fact that I was trying very hard not to look desperate. "You bake?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "Everybody says that. Can you wash dishes?" I washed dishes for 3 months, burned my hands on hot pans, learned the rhythm of prep work, watched dough from the edges of the kitchen, memorized supplier deliveries, stayed late without being asked, came early without being praised. Then one morning, one of the bakers ruined a biscuit batch by overworking the dough. I was supposed to dump it. Instead, I fixed it. I cut in a little cold butter, folded it gently, let it rest, and prayed Amos was still right about dough being honest. Mr. Patel tasted one. Then he tasted another. The next day, he moved me from dishes to prep. That was where I met Margaret Sloan. Margaret was one of those women small towns orbit around. Not loud, not flashy, just deeply, unshakably competent. She had silver hair, reading glasses on a beaded chain, a spine straight as a ruler, and the kind of voice that made people correct themselves before she even finished the sentence. She came into Golden Crust every Thursday morning at 7:15 for a black coffee and a cinnamon scone. Same order, same time, same table by the window. She noticed my notebook before she noticed me. "You actually write formulas down," she said one morning. I looked up from the page. "Yes, ma'am." "That means you're serious." She had owned a bakery of her own for nearly 3 decades before retiring. She also volunteered with a program for young adults aging out of foster care, which is how she knew exactly what kind of look I was trying not to wear. Not pity, preparedness. Over the next year, Margaret taught me everything Amos hadn't had time to. Food cost percentage, lease language, vendor negotiations, how to read a profit and loss statement without panicking, how to tell whether a landlord was smiling because he liked you or because he thought you were too inexperienced to challenge a bad clause. She would taste my lemon scones and say, "Less sugar. Adults are not toddlers." She would look at my menu ideas and say, "You don't need more options. You need more reasons for people to come back." She would tap a pencil against my notebook and say, "Dreaming is free. Rent is not. Learn the difference." One afternoon, after I had spent an hour complaining about startup costs and commercial ovens and how impossible everything seemed, she set down her coffee cup and said, "When you're ready to open your own place, I'll be the first one to co-sign." I stared at her. I had never heard anybody say they'd bet on me in a sentence that serious. She didn't rescue me. She didn't hand me a fantasy. She handed me a door and waited to see if I had the courage to walk through it. I did. At 26, I signed the lease on a narrow former sandwich shop on Poplar Street with cracked tile floors, terrible lighting, and a kitchen so small 2 people couldn't pass each other without apologizing. It was perfect. Margaret co-signed and lent me $15,000, interest-free. "Pay me back when you can," she said. "But if you fail because the market was cruel, not because your croissants were lazy." I scrubbed every inch of that place myself, painted the walls cream, hung a chalkboard menu, bought a used commercial oven from an Atlanta restaurant liquidation, drove it back in a rental truck with a coworker named Caleb Quinn, who had exactly 2 useful traits at the time. He could lift heavy equipment, and he didn't complain. I named the bakery Heart and Flour, not after my family, after the only heart who had stayed, and the ingredient that had never lied to me. Opening day, I had 6 menu items, 8 small tables, 1 overworked espresso machine, and enough anxiety to power the whole block. I started every morning at 4, sourdough, brioche, cinnamon rolls, brown butter pecan bars, seasonal galettes, cheddar biscuits. The first year was survival, the second year was stability, the third year changed everything. A local paper ran a feature about the bakery. A regional food blogger wrote that our pastry case looked like a love letter to Southern baking. Our sourdough sold out by 10 most mornings. People started lining up before opening. Caleb became my general manager. We hired 2 more bakers. Then I leased the storefront next door and started planning an expansion. Bigger kitchen, more seating, real espresso bar, south-facing windows, a proper grand reopening. It should have been the happiest season of my life. Then Caleb walked into the kitchen one Tuesday afternoon with a face I had never seen on him before, half confused, half concerned. "There's a man at the front asking for you," he said. "Says he's your father." The tray in my hand stayed steady. That was the strange part. My body didn't react immediately. It was almost worse than panic. It was stillness, the kind that comes when an old wound recognizes its own name before the rest of you catches up. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked out front. He was sitting at the corner table by the window, hands wrapped around a coffee mug. My father, Martin Hart, looked smaller than I remembered. Thinner through the shoulders, gray at the temples, tired in that specific way men get when bad decisions have begun to collect interest. He was wearing a flannel shirt with a grease stain near the cuff that somebody had tried, unsuccessfully, to scrub out. Some things soaked too deep. I sat across from him. I didn't hug him. I didn't ask how he'd been. I didn't tell him he looked older. I said, "Can I help you?" He looked at me for a long second. "You look like your mother." I held his gaze. "Which part?" I asked. "The part that leaves?" He flinched. "Good." He took a sip of coffee and got straight to it. No apology, no grief, no trembling father voice filled with regret. Just a problem. The auto parts store was failing. Online competition, debt, supply issues, Ryan trying to manage inventory, the bank calling, $40,000 behind, maybe more if things didn't turn around. Then came the line I knew was coming the moment he said we. "I'm not asking for charity," he told me. "I'm asking for family." I let that word sit there between us like rotten fruit. Family. He said it so easily, like the years in between were a paperwork error. "The day you left me at St. Agnes," I said, "you stopped using that word." He exhaled sharply. "People make mistakes, Elena." "No," I said. "Burning a cake is a mistake. Forgetting a birthday is a mistake. Choosing 2 children and leaving the third in an institution is a decision." His jaw tightened. He lowered his voice, perhaps realizing my employees could hear him from the counter. "I thought someone would adopt you quickly," he said. "You were smart. You were easy." Easy. That word hit me harder than anything else he'd said. Easy. As if my abandonment had been some practical transfer, a simple administrative solution. As if I had been furniture light enough to move without guilt. "You figured wrong," I said. He stared at the coffee. I stood up. "Finish your drink," I told him. "It's on the house. But this conversation is over." I turned and walked back into the kitchen before he could reclaim control of the room. He left the mug half full. The bell above the bakery door chimed when he stepped outside, cheerful and bright, the exact same sound it made for every customer who had ever walked in with good intentions. 2 weeks later, my mother appeared, but not at the bakery. No, Sharon Hart was too strategic for that. She went to church. Grace Fellowship was one of those places I attended quietly. I liked the music. I liked that no one there knew my history. I sat in the back, left early, never volunteered details. Apparently my mother found out. She showed up in a soft blue dress with pearls, a Bible that still had the stiffness of a brand new binding, and tears loaded like ammunition. By Monday morning, the story had already started spreading. Caleb told me first. He'd heard it from his cousin, who heard it from a woman who ran the coffee station after service. "She told people you two were separated by circumstances," Caleb said carefully. "Said she's been praying for a reunion." Of course she had. My mother could cry on command. She always had been able to. Not messy crying, beautiful crying, controlled crying. The kind that shines just enough in church lighting to make people feel protective and righteous at the same time. Within a week, 3 different members of the congregation approached me in different places. At the grocery store, outside the post office, near the pharmacy. Each of them had the same gentle expression. "Your mother seems lovely. Life is short. Maybe God is restoring something." I smiled tightly every time. What I wanted to say was, God didn't leave me in a children's home. My mother did. Then Caleb learned something else. My mother had been carrying around a framed childhood photo to show people. "My little girl," she called it, but the child in the photograph wasn't me. It was Chloe. Same age bracket, same era, different face. My mother was traveling through town staging grief with the wrong daughter in the frame. That was when something cold settled in my chest. Not pain, clarity. She didn't miss me. She missed the idea of being seen as a mother to a successful daughter. There's a difference. I stopped going to Grace Fellowship after that. Not out of shame. Out of disgust. Then Ryan found me on social media. Actually, that's not completely true. He had found me months earlier. He sent a friend request I ignored. Then he waited until the family drama had enough momentum to be useful, and tagged the bakery publicly in a post. The photo was from a 4th of July years ago. All 4 of us. Sparklers in hand. Me grinning between him and my mother like childhood had ever been safe long enough to deserve nostalgia. The caption read, "Can't wait for our family reunion. Proud of my little sister Elena and all she's accomplished. God is good." The post was already filling with likes, heart emojis, and comments from strangers who thought they were witnessing redemption. Family is everything. So beautiful. Praying for healing. Love this. I stared at my phone until the words blurred. He had taken a memory from before the abandonment and turned it into marketing. That night, I messaged him. "Take it down." He replied almost instantly. "Why?" "We're family," I typed back. "We stopped being family when Dad drove away and left me at St. Agnes." His response came a minute later. "I was 11, Elena. What was I supposed to do?" That answer might have worked if he were still 11. He was 34. "You were 11 then," I replied. "You've been an adult for over 2 decades. You could have looked for me. You didn't." He didn't answer for a while. Then finally, "Dad needs help. Mom does too. We're trying to fix things." "You're trying to fix your finances," I wrote. "That's not the same thing." He never took the post down. By the next morning, people from the local paper had started messaging the bakery asking whether we wanted to do a family reunion feature. A family reunion feature. Like my abandonment was just a delayed Hallmark special, waiting for a better ending. Margaret came by the bakery after closing that Wednesday, carrying a casserole dish and a look on her face that meant gossip had evolved into intelligence. "Sit down," she said, "and make coffee." When Margaret Sloan told you to sit down, you sat. She gave me 2 pieces of information that changed everything. The first was about my mother. Apparently, Sharon had not arrived at Grace Fellowship as some humbled woman seeking peace. She had arrived there because the last church she attended had quietly pushed her out. She had organized a charity clothing drive, collected donations, and somehow over $1,000 in cash earmarked for transport costs had ended up in her personal checking account. The church handled it quietly. No police, no public scandal. Just an invitation to worship elsewhere. Translation: my mother needed a new church, a clean image, and a respectable story. Reclaiming me publicly would help with all 3. The second piece of information was about my father. His debt wasn't just business debt. There was another $25,000 owed privately, gambling losses, according to a source whose husband drank in the same bar as Ryan. The store was failing, yes, but the bank wasn't the only thing closing in. Margaret leaned back in her chair after telling me all this and watched my face carefully. "They didn't come back because they missed you," she said. "They came back because you look stable." I nodded, because I already knew she was right. Still, hearing it aloud hurt in a way I hadn't prepared for. Not because it surprised me, because some old, stubborn part of me had still been hoping I was wrong. That night, after Margaret left, I stood alone in my kitchen long after the dishwasher had finished its cycle. I placed both hands flat on the steel prep counter. There was flour caught in the creases of my palms. A little butter under one thumbnail. The smell of cinnamon still hanging in the room from the morning's rolls. And I cried. Not because my family had failed me. They had done that years ago. I cried because a small 8-year-old version of me had somehow survived all these years inside my chest, still asking one pathetic question. What if they really did come back because they loved me? That child deserved an answer. And for the first time, I was ready to give her one. No, they didn't. What they loved was what I had built. That's the night I stopped wondering why they left, and started deciding what I would say when they tried to use me again. The grand reopening had been scheduled for weeks. Construction was nearly finished on the new space. Fresh paint, new tile, better lighting, bigger ovens, real seating, south-facing windows that made the pastry case glow in the morning like something out of a movie. This expansion wasn't revenge, it was business. But the timing felt almost biblical. One evening, after the last trays had been washed and the staff had left, Caleb sat across from me at a table in the unfinished dining room and asked, "Are you inviting them?" I was polishing the steam wand on the new espresso machine. "They'll invite themselves," I said. "And if they do?" I looked up. "Then I'm going to tell the truth." He was quiet for a moment. "The whole truth?" "Yes." "The town may not like that." "Then the town can decide whether it prefers comfort over honesty." He nodded slowly. He had known me long enough to understand something important. When I said something in that tone, I wasn't threatening a scene. I was making a plan. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and began writing. Not a revenge speech, not a public execution. Just the truth. Simple, direct, undeniable. Who helped me, who didn't. What happened, what didn't happen, what I built anyway. Sometimes the truth is more devastating than fury because it leaves nothing to argue with. Then my phone rang. Unknown number. Perry area code. I almost ignored it. I answered anyway. "Elena?" a woman's voice said. Soft, uncertain, younger than I expected. "Yes?" "It's Chloe. My little sister. Well, not little anymore." She sounded nervous, as if she was standing at the edge of a frozen lake trying to decide whether one more step would break it. "I know we've never really... I don't know if you even want to hear from me." I said nothing. Sometimes silence makes people honest faster than reassurance does. She inhaled shakily and kept going. "Mom told me my whole life that you were adopted by a nice family in Savannah. I found out last year that wasn't true. We got into an argument and she said something about St. Agnes and then tried to walk it back." I sat very still. The apartment was dark except for the lamp over the sink. Outside, a magnolia leaf scraped across the window screen. Chloe kept talking. "I started looking things up, found records, old articles. I realized you were actually there, and I can't stop thinking about you being 8. Her voice cracked on that last word. That got to me more than I expected. Not because it erased anything, because it sounded real. "Why are you calling now?" I asked. "Because Mom is telling people we're reunited. We're not. And I don't want you thinking I agreed to any of that. I closed my eyes. For a moment, I pictured the child version of her, the one with the stuffed rabbit and sleepy eyes, the child my mother had kept warm while I learned how plastic mattresses sound when you turn over at night. Thank you for telling me, I said, and I meant it. But I didn't promise anything else, because sincerity from my family had to earn its way in, and I had spent too many years paying emotional invoices they never signed. A few days later, I drove out to Harper Mills to confirm a bulk flower order for the reopening. It was a quiet place outside town, all gravel, metal siding, dust in the air, and old men who could identify wheat quality with one glance and no conversation. I was loading 50-pound sacks into the back of my van when I heard tires crunch behind me. I turned around, my father's truck. Of course. He got out slowly, trying to look casual, as if men accidentally arrived at remote flour mills all the time to ambush daughters they had abandoned. "Didn't expect to see you here," he said. We both knew that was a lie. "What do you want?" I asked. He leaned against his truck and folded his arms. The humble act he had tried at the bakery was gone. This version of him was sharper, colder, closer to the father I remembered, the one who made selfish decisions and then expected other people to live with them quietly. "I've been thinking," he said. "Try faster." His eyes hardened. "You're being unfair." I almost laughed. Unfair. The word floated between us like it had any business being used by him. "You think you built all this by yourself?" he continued. "Nobody's self-made, Elena. You owe something to the people who gave you life." That was it. That was the first time rage truly rose in me. Not wild rage, not screaming rage, but the clean, terrifying kind. The kind that clears your vision instead of blurring it. "You gave me life," I said. "Then you dropped me at someone else's door." His voice rose. "I did the best I could." "No," I said. "You did the easiest thing you could. Those are not the same." He stepped closer. "I am your father." "Then act like it," I shot back. "Show up 23 years ago. Know my birthday. Tell me what bed I slept in at St. Agnes. Tell me the name of one foster home. Tell me the first person who ever taught me how to bake. Tell me anything about me that isn't profitable." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Exactly. I shut the van door, got in, and drove away. My hands were shaking so hard by the time I hit the highway I had to pull over for a minute, not because I was afraid of him, because I had finally seen him clearly enough to stop being afraid of what he thought. There's power in that moment, the moment when someone who wants to find your pain becomes small enough to fit inside a sentence. 3 nights before the grand reopening, Ryan called me. It was raining hard, the kind of Georgia rain that turns gutters into rivers and makes every parking lot shine like black glass under streetlights. I answered because I wanted to know what new version of cowardice sounded like on a grown man. "Elena," he said, "Dad says if you don't help, if you don't at least act like we're together at the opening, he's going to tell people his side." I leaned against the prep table in the dark kitchen and listened to rain hammer the roof. His side? "He says he'll tell people you ran away as a teenager, that he and Mom looked for you, that you cut everybody off." There it was. Not just manipulation, preemptive rewriting. He wanted to lie first so my truth would sound reactive. "Ryan," I said quietly, "you were in the truck when he took me there." Silence. The rain got louder. Finally he said, "I was 11. "You keep saying that like it ended there." No answer. He was probably outside somewhere, hiding from our father while doing his dirty work. I suddenly pitied him, not enough to save him, but enough to understand the shape of his weakness. "Please just think about it," he said. I looked at the legal pad on the table beside me. 3 pages of truth. I looked at the ovens, at the display case, at the room I had built with discipline instead of excuses. "I've been thinking about it for 23 years, I said. Then I hung up. That same night, I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, one arm over my eyes, the leather notebook from Amos resting on the nightstand beside me. The fear wasn't of my parents. Not really. It was of the town, of the way communities sometimes choose the neat story over the true one. Repentant parents, grateful daughter, miracle reunion. Everyone cries, everyone heals, everyone claps. If I stood up at that opening and broke the script, I might become the villain. Ungrateful, cold, bitter, cruel. It wouldn't matter that I was telling the truth. Truth has never guaranteed popularity. And somewhere under all that, much deeper, there was the oldest fear of all. What if I told the truth and people still chose them? What if I was left again? At 3 in the morning, I got out of bed, drove to the bakery, turned on the lights, and started baking. Flour, salt, sugar, butter. The mixer roared to life. Dough came together under my hands. By dawn, I had made 4 sourdough loaves, 2 trays of scones, and one final decision. The flour did not care where I came from. It cared whether I showed up. I had shown up. That would have to be enough. The day before the reopening, the front door chimed while I was standing on a step stool adjusting a banner. Caleb was arranging chairs. 2 bakers were stacking trays. The room smelled like fresh paint, sawdust, and the first test batch of croissants. I turned and almost missed the step. Amos Bell was standing in the doorway. 22 years older, cane in one hand, denim jacket, white hair, same eyes. For a second, I was 8 again. He looked around the bakery, then back at me. "Heard you finally opened a real place," he said. "Figured I should inspect the damage." I climbed down so fast Caleb reached out in case I fell, and then I did something I almost never do. I hugged him. Not politely, not briefly, not performatively. I held on. Because there are some people who are not your blood, not your legal guardians, not your official anything, and yet they are so foundational to who you become that your whole life would collapse inward without the memory of them. He smelled like cedar and aftershave and flour. He patted my back once. "That'll do," he muttered, voice thick. When I let go, he took in the room again. The pastry case. The open kitchen. The menu board. The proofing racks. The espresso bar. The windows. "You did this," he said. I pulled out the notebook and handed it to him. He opened to the first page. Apple pie. Chef Amos says start simple. He read it once, then looked up at me. "No," he said quietly. "You started with being stubborn enough not to disappear." I had to look away after that, because sometimes the kindest thing anyone can do is describe your survival accurately. That night, I was at home reviewing the speech when my phone buzzed. A text from Chloe, then a photo. I opened it. It was a handwritten letter, my mother's handwriting. Loopy, tidy, unmistakable. Dated September 2003, 1 month after I had been placed at St. Agnes. It was addressed to my father. I zoomed in. The room went quiet around me. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once. I read the letter, then read it again, then a third time. One line in particular burned itself into my mind. "Don't call the agency. She's better off there. If we take her back now, people will ask why we gave her up. It's easier this way. Easier. That word again. Not necessary, not heartbreaking, not unavoidable. Easy. They could have come back. They didn't because they didn't want questions." I sat down slowly. No tears came. I had cried already. This was beyond crying. This was the death of the last excuse. I texted Chloe one word. "Thank you." Then I texted Caleb. "Print this. I may need it tomorrow." He replied in under 10 seconds. Done. I slept better that night than I had in weeks, because uncertainty is a strange prison. As painful as proof can be, clarity is often a form of freedom. The morning of the grand reopening, I arrived at the bakery at 5. Opening wasn't until 10, but bread has never cared about ceremonies. By 5:30, the ovens were hot. By 6, the croissants were in. By 6:15, the sourdough was blooming open. The new kitchen filled with steam and butter and heat and movement. Margaret arrived at 8:30 carrying white peonies from her garden. "For the front table," she said, as if we were discussing weather and not emotional warfare. Then she sat down, ordered a scone, and opened a newspaper. Amos drank coffee in the back like he had owned the building for years. Caleb moved through the front with the calm of a man who understood that hospitality is sometimes just precision disguised as kindness. By 9:30, guests began arriving. The local paper, a photographer, food bloggers, regulars, neighbors, chamber people, people who loved pastries, people who loved new businesses, people who loved gossip, and then, at 9:45, my family walked in. My father first. Crisp shirt, fresh shave, performance ready. My mother just behind him in navy blue and pearls, smiling that same church smile as if this event were a milestone in her motherhood instead of an exhibit of my survival. Ryan trailed them looking like a man walking toward a dentist appointment he had deserved. Then Chloe came in alone. She did not sit with them. That mattered to me. She chose a seat by the side wall and folded her hands in her lap. When our eyes met, I gave her the smallest nod. It was the only promise I could offer. At 10:15, Caleb handed me the microphone. The room settled. Coffee cups paused halfway to lips. Conversations died. Forks rested on plates. I stood on the small platform beside the pastry case, looked at the bright room I had built, and began. "Thank you all for being here today." My voice was steady. That surprised me. I spoke first about the bakery, the old space, the expansion, the staff, the customers who kept coming back. the dream of turning something small into something lasting. People smiled, they relaxed, they thought they knew what kind of speech this would be. Then I started naming the people who truly mattered. I want to thank Margaret Sloan. Applause. She believed in me before I had a business plan. Margaret waved one hand like she was annoyed by attention, though her eyes shone. I want to thank Amos Bell. More applause. He gave me my first recipe and taught me that care matters more than background. Amos lifted his mug. I want to thank Caleb Quinn and the rest of my team. The room clapped again. Then I took a breath. Some of you may know that my family is here today. My mother's smile widened. She reached for my father's arm. I looked directly at them. They came a long way, I said, but I came farther. The room changed. You can feel that moment when people sense a floor shifting beneath them. It's not sound, it's tension. It tightens the air. My mother's smile froze. I continued. I didn't grow up with a family, not because I was orphaned, because when my parents separated in 2003, they each chose one child to keep. No one moved. My mother took my younger sister, my father took my older brother, and me, the middle child, they left in a children's home. The silence that followed was unlike anything I've ever heard. Not polite silence, not shocked gasps, just total suspended understanding. My father stood up. Elena, that's not how... I looked at him. Sit down. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. It's amazing what authority sounds like when fear is finally gone. He sat. My mother's hand gripped his sleeve so tightly her knuckles turned white. I was 8 years old, I said. I spent years in foster care. I aged out of the system with $500, one suitcase, and a recipe notebook given to me by a cook at St. Agnes who cared more about me than my own parents did. I held up the notebook. The room stared at it like it was evidence in a trial. In a way, it was. Everything this bakery became was built by people who chose me without obligation, I said. Not because they shared my blood, because they showed up. My mother stood then, tears already on her face. Elena, honey, the circumstances. Which circumstances? I asked. The ones you told church people, or the ones you wrote down? Caleb was ready. I could feel it. Before I even turned, he was already handing me the printed letter. I unfolded it. My mother visibly lost color. I received this last night, I said. A letter written by my mother to my father in September 2003, 1 month after they left me. The reporter's pen stopped moving. The entire room leaned in. I read one line. Don't call the agency. She's better off there. If we take her back now, people will ask why we gave her up. It's easier this way. The words landed like a physical thing. Somewhere in the crowd, somebody whispered, "Oh my God." My mother covered her mouth. My father stared at the floor. Ryan looked sick. Chloe sat absolutely still, eyes shining but steady. I lowered the page. You did not lose me, I said. You left me because taking me back would have been inconvenient. My mother's voice came out strangled. Where did you get that? I looked toward Chloe. From the only person in this family who cared enough to tell me the truth. For one long second, nobody moved. Then my father grabbed my mother's elbow. We're leaving. She pulled free, snatched her purse, and marched toward the door in stiff, furious steps. My father followed. He did not look at me. The door clicked shut behind them. Not slammed. Clicked. Which somehow felt more humiliating. Ryan stayed seated. Head down. Hands clasped so hard I thought he might break one of his own fingers. I turned back to the microphone. This bakery isn't a family legacy, I said. It's proof that being left doesn't have to be the end of your story. And then something happened I will never forget as long as I live. Margaret Sloan stood up first and started clapping. Slow, steady, intentional. Amos joined her, then Caleb, then the staff, then the room. Not a dramatic movie standing ovation, something better. Real people choosing a side in real time. When the applause faded, I smiled through a throat so tight I could barely breathe. Thank you for coming, I said. The bakery is officially open. Everything you see in the case was made this morning. Please eat. I set down the microphone and stepped off the platform. My legs felt numb. Margaret reached me first and gripped my forearms with both hands. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Amos came next and rested his flour-dusted hand on my shoulder. Good hands, he said. Same words. All those years later. I almost lost it then. Not during the speech, not while reading the letter, not while my parents walked out, but there. At the sound of a man who had once fed lonely children in a harsh little kitchen calling me good again. Chloe waited until the room had loosened before approaching. She stopped an arm's length away. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't know." "You know now," I said. She nodded. That was enough for the moment. Not healing, not reunion, truth. And truth is a better foundation than fantasy ever was. The local paper ran a story a week later, not the family reunion feature they had probably expected. A better story, a truer one. The headline focused on the expansion, the business, the resilience. It mentioned the speech without sensationalizing it. It quoted me once, "Where you start doesn't get to decide where you finish." The community response shocked me. People did not turn on me, not the ones who mattered. Regular customers came in and gave me quiet nods. A retired teacher brought flowers and left them anonymously at the counter. A woman from Perry drove 40 minutes just to tell me her son had been in foster care, and that watching someone speak the truth publicly had meant more than I could know. No one made a spectacle of supporting me, and that somehow meant more. Support wrapped in ordinary behavior feels truer than support performed loudly. My mother sent a text, 3 paragraphs, all of it about her humiliation, her pain, her reputation, her church, her embarrassment, not one actual apology, not one sentence that began with "I was wrong." I deleted it. Then I shaped sourdough. My father never called again. Ryan sent a message too. Short, simple, no excuses. "I should have looked for you. I'm sorry." I stared at it for a long time. Then I wrote back, "That's a start. Not forgiveness, not closeness. A start." And that mattered because beginnings, when they're honest, are rare in families built on denial. Chloe came by one Saturday morning a month later. Then again the month after that. She sat at the table by the window and ate croissants while we learned each other in careful pieces. Not sisterhood, not yet. Just 2 women with shared blood and very different histories trying not to lie to each other. That was enough. As for my parents, my father's store went on the market. Nobody swooped in to save it. Not me, not destiny, not the community. You can only blame circumstances for so long before your own choices demand credit. My mother stopped attending Grace Fellowship. Whether she left voluntarily or was encouraged to worship somewhere less informed, I never bothered finding out. For the first time in my life, their reputations were not my burden to manage. 3 months passed, then 6, then a year. Heart and Flower settled into its new shape. The bigger kitchen worked beautifully. The espresso bar finally paid for itself. We hired 2 more bakers. Caleb ran front of house like he had been born with a ledger in one hand and a coffee towel in the other. Margaret still came in twice a week and criticized my display symmetry with the confidence of a woman who had earned the right. Amos sent me postcards from road trips, all of them with unreasonably blunt notes on the back. "Bread looks too pale in your latest photo. Fix it. Proud of you." I pinned every one of them on the board in the kitchen, and every Thursday evening, after closing, I started teaching a free baking basics class at the community center for kids in foster care. 6 kids at first, then 9, then a waiting list. I gave each one a composition notebook. "Write down every recipe you learn," I told them. "Someday you'll want proof that you were building something even when life felt temporary." I never asked them to tell me their stories. I didn't need to. I knew the look, the careful one, the measuring one. The one that asks whether adults mean what they say. So I made sure I did. I showed up every week, on time, with ingredients measured and ovens ready. No promises I couldn't keep, no speeches, just consistency. Which, for some children, is love translated into behavior. People sometimes ask whether exposing my parents at that grand reopening gave me closure. No, not exactly. Closure is too neat a word for what happened. What I got was something better. Permission. Permission to stop explaining their choices. Permission to stop carrying shame that never belonged to me. Permission to call what happened by its real name. Abandonment. And once I did that, everything got quieter inside me. Not easier. Quieter. The road to St. Agnes is still there. I drive past it sometimes on the way out of town. The building is closed now, vines crawling up the brick, iron fence rusted over, playground swallowed by weeds. I never stop. I don't need to. That place raised the version of me my parents didn't want. But it does not own the ending of my story. I do. Some people inherit family. I built mine, recipe by recipe, morning by morning, choice by choice. Out of flour, out of work, out of truth, out of the stubborn refusal to disappear. And if you're listening to this right now, feeling like the child nobody chose, I need you to hear me clearly. Being unwanted by broken people does not make you unworthy. Sometimes the first people who choose you won't share your last name. Sometimes your real life begins the moment you stop waiting for the wrong people to come back. Mine did. The night after our first anniversary in the expanded space, I locked up alone. The pastry case was empty, the counters were clean, my apron hung by the back door. Amos's notebook sat on the shelf above the prep table, its leather cover softer now than ever. I turned off the last light and stepped outside. The street was quiet, warm night air, distant traffic, soft glow from the bakery sign, heart and flower, my name, my work, my life, not borrowed, not handed down, earned. I stood there for a second with my keys in one hand and flour still caught in the lines of my skin. Then I looked through the front window at the tables, the chairs, the little world I had made from the very thing that once nearly broke me, and I smiled, because 23 years ago, my parents thought leaving me behind would make me disappear. Instead, it made me build something they could never take credit for. That was the justice, not their humiliation, not the letter, not the speech. The real justice was this. I became whole without them, and that is a kind of victory nobody can rewrite. So if you've ever had to build your own family, your own future, or your own sense of worth from almost nothing, I hope you never underestimate what that says about you. People who survive abandonment and still choose softness, still choose purpose, still choose honesty, they are stronger than most people will ever understand. That's my story. And if it stayed with you, I'd love to hear where you're watching from and what part hit you hardest. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.